It's been a while since we did one of these big comparison tests, but we are back and we have the Citroen C5 Aircross with us. Now, it has also been a while since we first drove the C5 and we were going to follow it up with a big feature, but then the second wave hit, we were back at home, the lockdown happened, you know the drill. Anyway, while we were sitting at home, the merger, the Stellantis merger in India was going ahead full steam. And the boss of Citroen in India is now the boss of Stellantis in India. And under him come these two cousins, the Compass and the Citroen C5 Aircross. How do these two cousins fare? That's what we're going to find out today. But we also have the Hyundai Tucson with us to give us perspective. But before we go ahead, don't forget to hit that bell icon and stay notified for all our videos. If you enjoy this video, don't forget to give us a thumbs up and also let us know which amongst these three would be your preference. Drop it in the comments below. We start with the newest amongst the three, the C5 Aircross, and the big talking point is Citroen's focus on comfort. Comfort in the damping, comfort in the sound insulation, comfort even in the way the engine and the gearbox are mapped out and they deliver the power. Everything is geared towards relaxing the driver and the occupants. The first thing that you notice is the steering, and it is just so light. Up here in the hills, going around corners, you just need one finger to turn the steering. It is just so light, so easy to operate and drive. So here, one finger and you can go around corners. And I'm not putting in any effort, it is just so light. Of course, there is sport mode. So you press the sport mode button and the steering does get a little bit more weight. The engine and transmission also get a little bit more energetic, but still it is just so light. In the hills, it's probably not the most desirable, but in the city, that makes the C5 just so easy to drive. Then there is the comfort in the damping. Now these dampers, they've got the hydraulic bump stops and that cushions the rebound even better. And overall, the setup has been tuned so that it can soak in these low speed bumps really well. You barely feel it. It just goes over these small little broken roads so well. It is a very comfortable car. But of course, the dampers are soft. And when you're pushing it around corners, there is a fair bit of body roll. There's no getting away from that. But on the plus side, Citroen have given this slightly wider tires than the Tucson. Both run on 18-inch rims, but the C5, it has got slightly wider tires and that gives it good overall grip. And when you chuck it around corners enthusiastically, you can actually get the inside rear wheel to lift a bit. That is surprising because Citroen, they make no pretensions of this being a sporty SUV. Nowhere do they say it, nowhere do they focus on sportiness or performance. This is just a very comfortable SUV. The engine, now this is a 2-liter diesel engine. You can get it only with an automatic gearbox, the 8-speed automatic gearbox. You can only get it with front wheel. It makes 174.3 bhp and 400 Newton meters of torque. So the Tucson, it has got a little bit more power, but the same torque. In terms of the performance, they feel more or less on par. It's quick enough. The gearbox, it responds quickly. You're never waiting for a downshift. And also the refinement of the engine inside the cabin is damn good. Now when you're standing outside, this engine is noisy. See, going over speed breakers, another speed breaker. Goes really well. So back to the engine. And when you're standing outside, you can hear it. It is very loud, surprisingly loud. But then inside, it is very silent. And that tells you that this NVH isolation is really good. You can't feel the engine. There are no vibrations that come into the cabin, nothing that you can feel through the steering wheel. So overall, in terms of that NVH isolation, it's very good, very impressive. Comfortable at low speeds, very easy to drive, but there are downsides also. Now, first things are these seats. These seats are really heavily padded and at first go, it feels very comfortable and very plush. But then after you jump into the other SUVs, that's when you realize that the seats are not as wide as the seats in either the Compass or the Tucson. And also the seat, it's too high up. This is set in the lowest position, and still, for me at least, this is too high up. So you feel like you're sitting on top of the car and not within the car. Then there is the infotainment. It's an 8-inch screen, same as the Tucson. The Compass gets a larger screen, but the operation of it is not very intuitive. For instance, now when you want to adjust the temperature, you have to go into the aircon menu and then adjust the temperature. You can't do it directly. So that means you have to take your eyes off the road. And then from the aircon menu to go back into, say, Apple CarPlay. So then you have to punch the music button and then punch CarPlay, and then you go back into CarPlay. So there needs to be a few more hard or at least direct buttons that gets you to the menus that are used more frequently. All three SUVs here get this huge panoramic sunroof, and especially in this kind of weather when it is drizzling a bit, the sun hasn't come out, it just is lovely. It adds to the sense of spaciousness inside the cabin. But in terms of actual spaciousness, let's check out what Atish has to say.
Right, the back seat of the C5 Aircross, it's actually a very interesting space here. And the reason for that is that this bench is divided into 3 equal parts. Now, you don't see that very often in cars. Most cars, they have 2 large seats behind the front passenger and driver seat, and the central seat is generally narrower and a little more uncomfortable. That's not the case here. Now, this has its pros and its cons. The pros are when you're seated 3 up, everybody has equal amounts of room, everybody feels equally comfortable, and the seats themselves for 3 people are better. But the cons of that is when you're sitting 1 person or 2 people, like I am right now, a single person at the back, you feel a little cooped up, because at the end of the day, this single seat is narrower than the wider seat that would come on the back seats of most other cars, including the other 2 cars here. So you do feel a little cooped up. Now, I'm a thin guy and I can fit here fairly comfortably, but if you're a little wider, you might find it uncomfortable. The fastening point of the seatbelt is what restricts you. You can't really go beyond this point, and that's what makes you feel cooped up. Another thing is this. So because you're sitting so far into the corner, you're sitting close to the door, and while you actually have a fair amount of headroom, your headroom gets a little bit compromised, say when you're in a left-hand corner like we're in one right now. So you get pushed up against the door and your head tends to hit this, which isn't a very nice sensation. But these are minor things. In terms of overall comfort, you've got a good amount of knee room. It's adequate, it's not great, but because these front seats are scooped out nicely, you've got a good amount of room. The seats themselves are plush, they're comfortable. I really like the way they're done, this combination of leather and fabric. This fabric feels a lot like denim. It feels really nice, very different from what we see on cars in this segment in general. Low speed ride, like Sirish said earlier, really good. Even in the back seat, it feels very plush, very comfortable. It does feel a little unsettled by slightly sharper bumps. You do feel a little bit of kick sometimes, but apart from that, it's very comfortable, very plush.
Unlike the Tucson, on the C5 Aircross, you get this digital cockpit with nice graphics, but I think it could have been done a bit better. For instance, the speedo is only this big digital readout. You don't get virtual dials. The rev counter, you don't get a virtual rev counter in terms of the dial. You get this bar on the top, which sort of looks like a much bigger fuel gauge, which I don't really like. And that just seems like Citroen being completely unsporty in the design and in the general makeup of the C5 Aircross. You also can't get your CarPlay display on the digital cockpit. You can't get your navigation on the digital cockpit. In fact, it does not have inbuilt navigation. You have to use CarPlay. So in terms of the functionality, even though it has a digital cockpit, I think you could have got much more out here. And this engine is quick. In fact, in terms of outright acceleration, it is the quickest in this test. Not by much, just a few tenths quicker than the Tucson, but it is quickest in this test. So you're going around corners and you know exactly where to tap the paddle. These paddle shifters fixed to the steering column, they are a very, very good touch. What the C5 Aircross does not get is all-wheel drive. You do get this drive mode selector out here, so you can switch off ESP, or you get the snow mode, which you probably use when you're in Shimla or Manali. Then you get mud, which I guess you can use a bit because you will get quite a bit anywhere you go. And then you get the sand mode. But this is purely front wheel drive, so that is only altering the mapping of the gearbox, the power delivery, and also the intervention of ESP. It's not going to give you that much more traction. So with the C5 Aircross, don't go onto sand tracks, don't get onto the mud. If you want to do all that, there is only one SUV that you should be looking at, and that is the Jeep Compass. Jump into the Compass, and the first thing that strikes you is that this feels like a Jeep, and this is a compliment. You see bad patches of road, you see rough roads, you don't slow down for anything, because the Compass, it gives you this overarching sense of being robust, of being built to handle a thorough beating. And it can take everything that you throw at it and then more. This is the only one in this class that gets proper 4-low. So on the automatic gearbox, with this 9-speed automatic gearbox, it also has the low ratio gearbox that we first saw on the Trailhawk. You get this 4-low button out here. You get the drive mode selector. So this adjusts the mapping for the 4-wheel drive system. So you have auto, and it is best to stick it in auto because Jeep brain has got more computing power than your brain, especially when it comes to 4-wheel drive. So you get auto, you get snow, and you get sand and mud. So that changes the mapping of the engine, and unlike the other cars, it also changes the mapping of the 4-wheel drive system. So it will get you unstuck. Of course, if you do something stupid, it will get stuck, but getting the Compass stuck is not that easy. Right when the Compass was launched, it got these Koni frequency selective dampers, and that gave it a good ride. Of course, at low speeds, it is a little firm, but as you build up speed, these broken patches, you can really hit it with gay abandon. The Compass is also nice to drive. In terms of outright handling, the Tucson has the edge. It has got more cornering grip, but the Compass is fun to drive. The steering, it is the weightiest in this test, and out on the hills, that is nice. It definitely makes it more engaging, but in the city, the Compass feels a little too heavy, a bit too bulky. It's not as effortless to drive as either the Tucson or the Aircross. This still is as engaging to drive as before, though you do get more understeer than either of those two SUVs, noticeably more understeer, and not as much steering precision either. So what's new on the Compass? Well, first things first, when you sit on the inside, you notice this all new dash. You get a different steering wheel. You get this huge floating infotainment touchscreen, 10.1 inches, whereas the C5 and the Tucson both get 8 inches. So this definitely feels more premium, looks also very good, and it's right in your field of vision. Of course, it does not obstruct your field of vision, but it is right there, so you don't have to really take your eyes off the road to look at the different functions out there. In terms of operating it, it actually is very intuitive. You also get a digital cluster where you can adjust the view, so you can get dials for the speed on the tacho, or you can get a digital readout for the speedo. It also shows you what off-road mode you are in. The gearbox, it is the 9-speed automatic gearbox. Probably 1 speed's too many in this box. And in terms of the responsiveness, it is not as quick to respond as either the Hyundai or the Citroen gearbox. The engine, it is the same FCA 2-liter diesel engine, which is also there in the Safari and the Harrier. A nice engine, as we've seen, but it is not the quickest in this class. It is also noisy, though on the outside, the Citroen sounds even noisier. But on the inside, because the Citroen has got better NVH damping, out here in the Compass, you can hear more of the engine than either of the three. The one big area where the Compass lacks compared to its two rivals is space. Now, in the past, that wasn't really that much of an issue because the Compass was slotted between the Creta and the Tucson. Now, the Compass is actually more expensive than the Tucson. Believe it or not, it is more expensive. And that's why we have to point out the backseat space.
the back seat of the Jeep Compass. Now compared to the Citroen C5 Aircross, you've got a traditional rear bench over here. So you've got two wide seats and a narrower central seat. And that's great because that means you can stretch out. You have enough room for your arms here. You've got this central armrest over here. It's all very comfortable, spacious. But you need to remember that the Jeep Compass is the narrowest car in this test by a fair margin, especially if you compare it to the Citroen. So in that sense, when you flip this up and you try to fit 3 people in here, that person in the middle and actually all 3 of them are not going to be very comfortable because shoulder room is limited when there are 3 abreast over here. Leg room, not too bad. You've got good amount of knee room. Headroom, it's adequate. This sunroof eats into it a little bit, but it's not uncomfortable. I'm 5'10" and I have adequate headroom. The back seat, I wouldn't say it's the best place to be because the ride quality of the Jeep isn't as good as the other 2 cars out here. Over bad roads, it is a little firm, it is a little jarring, and in that sense, it can get a little uncomfortable in the back.
The Compass might only be a facelift, but I really like what they've done to the nose. It now looks like a baby Grand Cherokee. So much more muscular, such great road presence, and also this dark green shade, it complements the car's lines just so well. This looks young. It definitely has the younger vibe compared to the other 2. The other 2 look sort of middle-aged, but this is young, it is youthful, it is more appealing just to look at. It gives off this go anywhere vibe, which is backed up by ability. Follow, selectable modes for the off-road. You point it at a mud trail and it will definitely go far. There is this saying, "Ghar ki murgi dal barabar," which basically translates into we take for granted what we are very familiar with. The Tucson, we are extremely familiar with. This is in fact my long-term test car, and I've had long-term test Tucsons ever since it was launched in India. So I know this car intimately, and it's a shame that this is not at the top of everybody's buying list. When the Tucson was first introduced, it changed our perception of what Hyundais could do in terms of ride, in terms of handling, in terms of performance, in terms of space, in terms of sheer luxury and desirability. And then on, all the other cars that Hyundai make have been really good. Now this is the facelift that came not that long ago. What it got was a sharpened up nose, different DRL LED lights, on the inside a floating infotainment touchscreen, but the big change was the gearbox. This 8-speed automatic, it replaced the earlier 6-speed, and that 6-speed actually went to Tata Motors into the Harrier and the Safari. So this gearbox, because of the closely stacked ratios, it actually gives the Tucson better acceleration. It also has the most power in this test, 174.5 bhp, 400 Newton meters of torque from this 2-liter diesel engine. And this diesel engine is also very refined, especially when you compare it with the Compass, which is loud and little coarse. This is smooth. This gearbox is really good. It responds very well, very quick, and very well matched to the character of this engine. Only thing is, you don't get paddle shifters to operate the gearbox manually. You do get a sport mode, so you flip it right and you move it up and down the box. So you get that, but otherwise there are no paddle shifters for the gearbox. You do get a sport mode. So there's this drive mode selector, you get eco, and then you get the sport mode. And sport mode makes a noticeable difference in terms of the responses of both the gearbox as well as the engine. This is quick, under 10 seconds to 100 kilometers per hour, like the Citroen C5 Aircross. So it's a quick SUV, and unlike the Citroen, this does feel more sporty. This is more engaging to drive. There is more cornering grip, and there is more enthusiasm around corners. There really is nothing to complain about on the Tucson. Little things, the seats for instance, okay, they don't feel as thickly padded as the C5, but on long drive this is very comfortable, and actually this is more accommodating than the C5. At the back, well, I'll toss it to Atish and he'll tell you how much better it is at the back.
The back seat of the Hyundai Tucson actually feels the most spacious, and that's because of the amount of knee room you have. The Tucson has the most knee room of any of the cars here. Even the headroom, it feels a lot because the sunroof, it stretches behind your head. It's the only one in this class that has such a large sunroof. And the seats themselves, they're very plush, very comfortable. They're not as soft and cushy as the C5 Aircrosses, but the seating position is very nice. The amount of thigh support you have is very nice. And overall, it is by far the most comfortable back seat. If you're one or two people in the back seat. The thing about the Tucson is it isn't as wide as the C5. It's wider than the Jeep Compass, but it's not as wide as the C5. So 3 people here won't be as comfortable as in the Citroen. That said, ride quality on the Tucson is really nice. It's the most balanced ride over here. It's not as plush as the C5s at low speeds, but over a variety of conditions, it feels more composed, more pliant, and you feel more comfortable here in the back seat of the Tucson.
What the Tucson lacks compared to its rivals is the digital cockpit. This gets regular analog dials, but really, I don't have a problem with anybody's analog dials. I don't see what the big deal around digital cockpits are, but this has got the analog dials. This infotainment is 8 inches. It's not 10 inches like the Compass, so it does feel a little smaller. The Compasses does feel a little more fancy, and in fact, the Compasses interiors feel more modern than the Tucsons. But also the Tucson is on its way out. There is an all-new Tucson that is coming in. But that said, this still is the pick in this segment. Seriously. Many years ago when the Tucson was first launched, we actually pitched this against the Tiguan. And the Tiguan, to our minds, was the benchmark because a German car, properly German engineered car. And surprise, surprise, the Tucson actually bested the Tiguan. It was the first time that a Hyundai bettered a Volkswagen. And that set the template for things to come. Today, Hyundai, they make cars that are nearly as good to drive as their big German rivals and loaded with more equipment, more features, better value for money, more powerful engines. Can you imagine? The Tucson, this is the car that kicked off that trend. Like I said, we are very familiar with the Tucson. Now the C5 has those fancy dampers with the hydraulic bump stops. The Compass has the FSD conies. This has regular suspension. Yet the ride quality on the Tucson is actually very good. And in fact, when you load it up, so say 4 people, little bit of luggage, you're driving it on regular Indian highways with their broken patches, this can take it better than the C5 Aircross. This can take a little bit more loading and a little harder bumps. It can take this better. So that is a surprise. Round corners, this handles really well. It has slightly narrower tires than the C5, but it grips better and it is more fun around bends. Now the 4-wheel drive system, this is all-wheel drive and this basically is for slippery conditions. Not wet roads, but if you have gravel, if you have snow, that's when it actually comes in handy. And also when you are accelerating off the traffic lights, when you have a concrete surface, this develops good grip. The all-wheel drive, it generates good traction and gets you a quicker 0 to 100 time, sub 10 seconds to 100 kilometers per hour. But this is not an off-roading all-wheel drive system. So if the Compass heads off into the jungles, don't go following it with the Tucson because this is not going to go as far as the Compass. And Hyundai don't even make any pretensions of this being a hardcore off-roader. That territory is Jeep territory for sure. But on the road, this is easier to live with. It's lighter, easier to drive, better in terms of the handling, a more responsive gearbox, more power from the engine, good refinement from the engine. It actually does everything that you want and it does it with a little bit more luxury. Okay, these interiors now look a little too familiar and even on the outside, it doesn't look as new, which means doesn't look as desirable as its rivals, which is that whole thing, right? Ghar ki murgi dal barabar. But it still does things as well and in fact in some areas better than its rivals. The The Jeep has a clear purpose in life. If you're looking for an off-roader, if you're looking for something that you can take off-roading on the weekends, go mud plugging, go out into the jungles, the Compass is definitely the SUV for you. It is the only one that offers 4-low, and in terms of sheer capability, especially when you're going off-road, the Compass beats the others hollow. It also looks damn cool. At least to me, this looks cool, this looks funky, and even though this is just a facelift, it looks so desirable. But does it justify the newly hiked prices? At one point in time, the Compass slotted in between the Creta and the Tucson, but now with all these updates, the Compass is actually 1 lakh rupees more than the Tucson. That's something to think about. But the crown of the priciest in this test goes to the Citroen C5 Aircross, 32.5 lakh rupees. Is that worth it? Well, the interiors, they have sort of some of the nicest materials, the best finishes. There is also the novelty associated with the Citroen brand, new to India, and this also looks fresh and cool. It will definitely get you noticed. But it does ask for a fair bit of money, and that brings me to the Tucson. Now, the Tucson doesn't look the coolest. It is not the newest. It is not the freshest in this test, but it is the most affordable without losing out on equipment. It is also got a lot of space, good ride, good handling, a very refined engine, a very good automatic gearbox. It also has all-wheel drive. In fact, the Tucson, it does almost the best of everything. Is it the winner in this test? Not really, because this is different strokes for different folks, but this is a great all-rounder.
Subscribe to the Evo India channel and hit the bell icon to keep pace with the thrill of driving.